I think you will need
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Started, please feel free to help yourself to drinks and snacks. But I think we're finally in a place that we can get underway here. We're excited that you're all here. They can hear us on Zoom. Can y'all hear us on Zoom? I don't see a thumbs up. Thumbs up if you can hear me. Yes, Shannon, you can hear me. Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you, Shannon. Okay, so we have three wonderful speakers here with us today. We have Dr. Nicole Patton-Terry. She's going to start off, and we have Dr. Laura Perez-Faulkner and Dr. Jenny Root, and they're going to talk to us about their story of a research partnership. This is our first colloquium for the fall semester. Our first time being back in person, which is really exciting. So yay! So thank you all for being here, and please continue to come for the rest of the academic year. We'll be handling it in the same way in terms of advertising and food and that sort of thing. So we appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So we're really gonna try hard to keep the time to make sure we have time for discussion, right? So pull me or I'll pull you, right? So my name is Nicole Patton-Terry. I am, let's see how we want to do that.
How would you say yours?
Okay, that's what I thought. We are here today to talk to you about our research practice partnership Read Up, and these are all the lovely women who helped lead this work with me at FCRR. So we're going to give an overview of why RPPs and why we're doing this work, the work that is actually happening in Read Up, and our different buckets of work, and then how it is we're thinking about building institutional capacity for RPPs. And in doing that, we're going to jump in and out of this discussion. Okay, you can certainly feel free to raise your hand and ask questions at any point in time. So you can stop us. I thought it would be helpful for those who might be new to the community to know who we are at FCRR, because Read Up lives at FCRR. So FCRR is a research center here at Florida State University. It was founded almost a little bit over 20 years ago with Joe Torgerson, who was an FSU faculty person, and Jeb Bush, who was the governor of Florida at that time. So we are just recently celebrating our 20th anniversary. We do tons of research at FCRR that we then translate those discoveries into practical things, tools, resources, information that can be used in schools and communities, in classrooms, and with families. And then we also have that research translated into policy. So you will see pieces of these discoveries implemented in policy here locally, but also across the nation. And so several of our FCR faculty members are here and are a part of the School of Teacher Education. Why RPP? Why research practice partnerships? We thought it would be useful to remind ourselves, and let me hide this. There's a way to hide this so you all don't always see it. All right. That should help a little bit. When we started thinking about doing this colloquium, we reminded ourselves that we had talked about this a little bit ago when I first joined FSU. And so I thought we would just do a quick reminder. When I presented about this at the colloquium in 2018, we talked about what research practice partnerships are. There is a more recent report from the William T. Grant Foundation about it. They are organized in very different ways across the nation, and they've sort of taken fires, kind of a little bit of the new sexy these days to do RPPs. But what you find about them in terms of their characteristics, what you see across them, is that they tend to be long-term collaborations between researchers and non-researchers, practitioners or community members or others who are non-academic entities. They tend to be organized in such a way to suggest that the work that they do will improve educational outcomes or result in equitable transformation. And usually those things are somehow defined in the way they're organized or in the way of their work. There is engagement with research, and this is important to remember. Research practice partnerships are not service, they are research. That is the one thing that actually really distinguishes them from what we commonly see in university settings, which are service learning opportunities. You might see that in courses, or you might see it in centers, you see it across the institution. That is a very good thing. Of course, we want our students engaged in our local communities. So you see that a lot, but these are distinguished in the fact that you are using your research, you're leveraging your research to make a positive impact or outcome in the public. So research is central to what you do in an RPP. RPPs try to have diverse partners at the table so that you can leverage diverse forms of expertise. So the researcher is not the smartest person in the room or the only person who's bringing expertise to bear on whatever the problems of policy or practice are. And because of that, you try to organize yourselves and attend consistently to whatever the power dynamics are in your partnership so that everyone feels like they are contributing to that work and making those decisions and driving that work forward. And in doing all of that, you end up with joint work. It is collaborative work with both researchers and non-researchers working together. You also asked me at that time, what were my lessons learned from launching and sustaining RPPs? I had done that work before I came here to Florida State. And so I will just remind you the things we lifted up at that time were the notion that context matters to how these partnerships exist, how they function, how well they launch, and how well they last. That authentic partnership really matters. If you are entering a partnership for the sole purpose of getting a grant, it very likely will not launch and it will not sustain, at least not beyond a grant. And if it's just focused on the grant, it very likely isn't a partnership. It's just a grant. And it's a grant project. Great to have funded grants. That's a good thing, but that's different than an RPP. Funding, in fact, is not necessary to start. So you can start a partnership or research partnership without the money. Everyone that I have started has been without money, right? But the money matters to the sustainment, and it certainly matters to the quantity and the quality of work that you can do. And then finally, infrastructure is really important if you want to see these things carry on and succeed. So there are a lot of infrastructure and capacity building things you have to attend to that are not the research in order for these things to happen. So with that in place, let's talk about our RPP. Well, when I got here, I discussed how I wanted to do this kind of work here, and that the first thing you really need to do is understand your place. So if you fly into Tallahassee's airport, this is the map that you'll see on the wall that was commissioned by one of our nonprofit organizations here in Tallahassee. And it's supposed to give you a really nice, beautiful overview of this lovely place that is Tallahassee. One thing that's very apparent in Tallahassee is that we have our two universities, right? We've got Florida State here, and literally across the railroad tracks, we've got Florida A&M here. That is by design and on purpose, right? We also now have Tallahassee State College, so they're probably going to update this to say Tallahassee State College. And so in thinking about knowing your place and your context, how do we address reading in this place? Well, first thing we have to remember, just like I showed you on that map, that there are clear inequities that exist here in this place, that inequities function in systems. There are levers and mechanisms that are pulled all the time in those systems, and they have multiple levers happening at the same time. And so in our city, if you can see, I know it's hard a little bit to see, I don't want to touch lights, but you can see lots of green dots here, lots of blue dots here. And what you see is that we pretty much have a city that is divided in black and white. The Parkway, Appalachian Parkway goes through there. There's Florida State and Florida A&M sitting right in the heart of the city. I-10 is up here. And that's where I live. I live on the southeast side. So you can look at our city and consider the way these mechanisms are happening in place. So for example, housing. Housing policies across the nation going well back to World War I and even before then made it so that we have policies in place that allow for pulling people in neighborhoods apart in our city. And that's every city. And so when you put up heat maps like this, you do see racial divides and economic divides in the way that the cities are organized, because that was by design. Those policies were designed to keep us apart, right? So you see it in housing, but the effects don't stop at housing. So for example, in Tallahassee, we would all agree that in order for children to learn well in school, they need to be healthy, right? Where are all the hospitals in Tallahassee? It doesn't just stop there. What about nutrition? We would all agree that in order for children to benefit from learning opportunities in our schools, that they would need to come in healthy and nutritious and have had a good breakfast, a nice meal at home, right? Where are all the grocery stores in Tallahassee, right? Where you would have probably all agreed that in order for children to learn well in school, there's there's financial and economic incentive that's necessary in the home and outside the home for children to benefit in school. Well, where's all the individual income wealth in Tallahassee? And like every other heat map, red is bad. So these are the resources family have available to bring into the home to support educational outcomes in Tallahassee. And you will see that in our schools. So if I'm interested in figuring out what's happening with reading in our schools, here are all of our elementary schools in Leon County Public Schools. Also keep in mind that Florida A&M and Florida State operate lab schools as well. But this is where we live. This is where we are sitting right now. Same thoroughways. There's I-10, there's a parkway, there's our institutions. This is a percent, now this is post-COVID, so these are updated numbers as of last year. So this is the percentage of these are the schools, the red circles represent the schools where students are not, more than 50% of students are not passing the state reading test in 2022. So more than 1 in 2 kids are not passing the state reading test. These are the schools for where at least 15% of students have an IEP to receive services for disabilities. Everybody in here who's ever worked with a student with disabilities knows that very likely they will have challenges with reading, writing, oral, or written language, which means very likely these are children who are probably struggling with some aspect of reading and literacy. These are the schools where that more than 50% of students entered school not performing at expectation on the kindergarten readiness assessment. So these are schools where more than half the students aren't ready to benefit from awesome instruction in reading. It should be very clear to you that there are some overlapping issues here. So if we were to go into a school, if I was to go into Woodville School and say, I want to help you with reading, reading cannot be the only thing. They are dealing with multiple issues at that time. So that means that if we want to be in partnership with them to address reading, we can't just focus on reading. So what do? Well, what we started was first figuring out how to help them get to us. We don't have a front door for partners at Florida State for research partnerships. There might be other front doors, other entities, centers, places on campus where people go if they want to partner with the university, but to partner with the university to do research or make use of research evidence in your decision-making and your activities, we don't have a front door for that. FCRR doesn't have a front door for that. So we created the village, we created a front door for that. And we tell people how it is, if you call us, if you come to our front door, how we will answer the door. Because there are different ways to partner with people. So you can connect them to research and evidence-based practices, policies, things of that nature that already exist in the world that might address what they need. You can also champion them because we don't always have to be on our white horse coming in to save people. People don't want to be saved. They want to be helped, right? So can we get behind you in your literacy night? Can we get behind you in your spelling bee? Can we get behind you in your community event and bring those resources there? And then finally, collaboration, which is much more in-depth, long-term, what we traditionally think about as our RPPs, and moving together to ask and answer questions and use that evidence to then make changes in what it is that you do. Then we went about the business of creating the documents of a partnership. So we have a partnership agreement and we have a theory of change that outlines for everyone at the table what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what we expect to see as a result of the work that we do. And then we get those documents signed at a school board meeting. And so in December 2019, which was 18 months after me getting here, we officially had this partnership called Read Up. We officially were focusing on early learning and school readiness, students with disabilities and reading. And together we were going to work with our district to create a place where all students were thriving in every neighborhood and in every school. That's where we were about 5 years ago. One thing important to note here, and with our superintendent and our school board members, you will see sprinkled in here, FSU students. FSU students created these documents in our class. So we have a class called Researching Communities and Schools, which that was a part of capacity building. We needed a class, we didn't have one. Now that we have one of the assignments was to create the documents that would sustain a partnership. And so those students were there the day we signed it. So given that very quick overview, here's, I want to give you one example, one thing we do in reading, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jenny, who's going to talk about students with special needs. So here's one example, and you can't see it. Let me get rid of this. The Hegarty study. So at some point in our time in the last couple of years here, some of you may be familiar with Hegarty. It is a supplemental program that is in a lot of schools around the nation and is the subject of a lot of conversation around the nation in terms of how it suggests that we support reading skills in young children. I don't know why it keeps coming up. And so it made its way here. And it made its way here like what typically happens in lots of schools. It spread like wildfire. One school picked it up. And then somebody called somebody, it showed up at 6 schools. And it was at 12, and then it was just everywhere. And the district wanted to know, is this thing useful or helpful? Because it costs, it takes time away from instruction, and we don't really know. They didn't really know what the impact of it was. If it was good, then they want to support it. But if it wasn't, then they want to figure out what to do about it. So we did a small study where we worked with the district to find schools that were using Hegarty and matched them to schools that were not. And tried to do as best of matching as we could, because this is not a controlled study, right? Where I started with an experimental control that I put into place and I controlled everything. This is happening in the real world in real time, right? So we make use of really crazy, fancy, snazzy statistical methods and models and things of that nature. But we also, through our agreements, are able to get the data that we need to answer these questions for them. And what we find is that students receiving Hegarty did not score significantly different than control students at the end of the school year in kindergarten or first grade. And in second grade, they did not score significantly different either. And in fact, in second grade, they're actually doing a little worse. So armed with this information, the district is able to make a decision about what they're going to do about people's use of this program that may not be benefiting their students. This is also at a time when the district we had done a landscape analysis for them of what reading programs were being used in the district, and it was something like 46 different programs being used. We don't even have that many schools. So it really was their attempt to try to really hone in on what it is that should be happening in instruction, and helping folks understand that you don't need 5 different programs. So maybe this, which doesn't have any added value for you, maybe you don't need this. And the next step is helping people understand how to make decisions with data, but armed with this information, they're able to have very different conversations. So that's one example of what we do in reading. I'm going to turn it over. Oh, I'm going to keep going and talk about early learning at school success. You talking? Dr. Lakeisha Johnson leads our unit on early learning and school readiness, but she was unable to be with us here today, but I'm going to share a couple of examples of what we're doing. So for example, I showed you the data about how many children were entering school ready to benefit from high quality instruction in early language and literacy skills. It's not enough. And so we've been working with the district over a couple of years. Some of you may have seen recent news press on the Littles to Leaders program. We've been working with them to help define and understand what are the components of that and what should be involved in that might actually impact what happens for kids in school. So the Little Leaders program is when a mom has a baby at TMH at the local hospital, they get a bag of resources, evidence-based resources to support them in engaging their children early with language and literacy skills. So the goal is to continue to, this is one of those help them uptake and use things that already exist. Them uptake and use and make sure that this is informed with evidence and not just fun stuff. The fun stuff is good. You need the fun stuff. If you don't have the fun stuff, they're not going to do it. So we absolutely have low bibs with graduating in 20, 30, 12 or whatever year the little baby's going to graduate in. That stuff matters, right? But also how children, how parents talk to their children matters. So can we give them guidance in there about what the evidence says around how you can have really powerful, engaging conversation with infants that matters to their later reading development. Oh, and I just said that. So that's the mom getting the bug with our superintendent. And then this is a book that they commissioned by a local author around Tallahassee that we help. We help them figure out what to put in the book and what the language was like in the book and what kind of interaction can happen within the book. We also have developmental screenings that are happening here. Lots of our local nonprofits do that. One of them is Whole Child Leon, who's a partner of ours. So we go to those screenings. Our students get training. They develop hours in doing those screenings as well. So they're as a part of that as well. And then a new study that we are just undertaking right now, there is an existing resource, an existing professional learning community that is built for early learning teachers, so preschool and pre-K teachers, that is evidence-based. So there are 4 recommendations based on a WWC practice guide on how you improve early oral language and literacy skills. So there is a facilitator guide and a participant guide that can be used in a certain number of sessions to improve the teaching of those skills. So our school district is going to start using this PLC, and we are doing research around teacher outcomes and student outcomes as a result of participating in the PLC. So that is underway as we speak. And stop there. Go for it.
All right, so I'm Jenny Root. I'm an associate professor in special ed here at Florida State and an affiliate faculty with the Florida Center for Reading Research. So I'm going to talk about sort of how my involvement in the partnership has evolved over time so that you can kind of see how things organically develop, but then also you can push things to develop, and it's a balance of the two. So to start in 2020, it's so interesting in preparing for this session and going back to find pictures, and I feel like that was so long ago and yet not. So it's interesting to reflect. I received a text from someone in the district that I know who said, hey, we really need help with this whole teaching in the room and on Zoom thing. Remember when that was happening? Particularly our special ed teachers really needed support with that. And so I was just beginning to join the partnership work with Read Up. It had just started. And I said, well, you know what? I have 5 excellent new doctoral students who just came out of the classroom. We can help problem solve this for you. And so what we did was we set up virtual PLCs for special education teachers in the district. All of them were invited. We had 56 participate. And so I wanted to be transparent also about like the ingredients behind this, the money, who paid for what and when. And so the district paid $250 stipends for each teacher that participated through the whole year. And then the district also worked with us to give us, on the FSU side, access to their Canvas. So that meant they got us email addresses and logins, and you all who've worked in districts know that's not a small ask. So that was a big give of them to help us with. Because we wanted to house everything within Canvas. That was another request of the district because that's what they were trying to encourage their teachers to use as well. The district identified 4 topics for those to work on. Distance learning was the first. So how do you teach on the room and in the room and on Zoom at the same time? Grouping, data collection, and collaboration. So I had 5 wonderful doctoral students who were funded on OSEP grant, Office of Special Education programs. And they divided up the teachers. And so we put them in role-alike groups. So we had, for example, elementary self-contained, different from elementary resource teachers, middle and high school separate. And they met monthly over Zoom. We did a impact survey afterwards, and the open-ended responses were probably the most impactful. What I really appreciated as a teacher, former teacher of students with significant disabilities, where I felt like every PD I ever went to, I had to make it relevant for me. Or they would ask me how it applied to my students. I'd say, well, that's why I'm here. And so one of the takeaways was that the teachers really appreciated that role-alike grouping, the chance to talk with other people who are doing this exact same thing that they are. And they found, rated it really highly, said that they would participate in future PLCs that directly impacted their classroom. So there was no research there. There was a translation of research, right? We wanted to look at what we did know at the time about things like virtual learning, grouping. So it was research informed, but there was no attempt to collect data or get like consents from anyone. And I think that goes back to there's a difference between going into a school and doing research, which is good and necessary. Going into a school and doing professional development or technical assistance, also important and necessary, and a research practice partnership, right? But these are long-term, and coming in the door with a consent form won't get you very far, or won't come in the door. And so what we focused on a lot, when you look at these 5 dimensions of RPPs, a huge piece of it is trust and relationships and collaboration. And so we needed to establish that with teachers, but then also with the district partners. So in moving into the 2021-2022 academic year, these PLCs were great, but we realized like they have very different needs. And so the district wanted to expand, and they offered 3 choices for teachers who wanted to participate. So there was one that was run by FIN, the Florida Inclusion Network, that paired teachers and their paras. And so we didn't really have anything to do with that group. One group was going over math practices, evidence-based math practices, and how to support them. I led that group. And then Addie McConomy led a PLC just for novice special ed teachers. So just those teachers with 0 to 4 years experience, because again, their needs are also going to be different than the more experienced teachers. But we also had, you see my dotted line, a very organic aspect to the relationship develop. And that was, I had a student who is in the Ed Specialist program, who through that program learned about emerging practices, evidence-based practices. She was the chair of her curriculum committee. And so through that, they approached us and she said, now you're doing these other PLCs and we're a part of it, but can you do something specific for our school? Because this school only has students with the most significant disabilities. So again, their needs are also different. And so these were sort of the 4 activities. I want to highlight when research did happen. And so as a part of that virtual PLC, Addie developed a observation tool for the practices that she was supporting them to implement. So a little bit more on the specifics. The district once again provided participants with stipends. And the FSU Foundation provided classroom materials for each practice. So we gave them like manipulatives and things that would match each of the 6 practices. So if you attended the PLC on Tuesday that was about working on fact fluency, then Danielle drove around to all the schools and delivered nice little bags that had some sort of treat and manipulatives or classroom materials to go along with it. We used the, at that point, recently published What Works Clearinghouse practice guide. So we went based on those 6 practices. And then as far as the personnel money and cost, I led these, and then I had a OSEP funded master student who helped me with the back end side of the Canvas, and then also with going and delivering everything. And then, as Nicole mentioned, we had this course that she thankfully developed. And so we also were able to involve the doctoral students who were enrolled in that course. And so I had one of them help me in the spring semester. This virtual math PLC had 30 special education teachers and 1 administrator, a principal participated. And that gave up to 9 hours of like direct contact with them. We did a mid-year feedback and it was great. Everybody felt like our format was effective. But then we wanted to know, what would you like? How could we adjust this? And what they really wanted was that hands-on, like one-on-one support afterwards. And so once we took this feedback, we then offered a variety of additional supports for the teachers who wanted it. Then as well that year, we had the literacy professional development that was requested by that school. So the school time, they allocated 2 faculty meetings just for us, which here is a big deal. That's their, with the collective bargaining agreement they have, the district can only mandate that teachers attend so many meetings, especially outside of contract hours. And so they only have 1 of those a month. And she gave 2 out of the spring semester to me, which I think showed the buy-in from that principal. She also was committed to having all of the paraeducators trained in the same practices. And so in that school, every classroom has 2 to 3 paraeducators. And so she arranged for coverage and flexibility in their schedules so that the teacher who reached out to me would take what I did in the training and then do it with the paraeducators. So every single adult in the building was on the same page when it came to these 2 evidence-based practices. And what's important is the curriculum committee, they're the ones who identified what those practices were. It wasn't us. This was supported by 3 of our OSET-funded doctoral students who were enrolled in that course, as well as the EDS student. This ended up being her capstone project, was how it impacted the paraeducators. And we used a design-based implementation research framework. So this was presented at AERA one day. We'll make it into a publication somewhere. But it also resulted in her capstone project, where she looked specifically again at preparing paraprofessionals. And then the virtual PLCs, again, the district provided stipends for 6 sessions. And then we partnered with a professional organization, the Big Bend chapter of the Council for Exceptional Children, and they hosted a social event. So this is what the teachers and what Addie was saying, they want to get together, they want to be able to talk, we want to have that social network for them. And so we then reached out to you. A takeaway at this point is you have to hustle. But you can find bits of money for what you need. And again, this was open for any special ed teacher with 0 to 4 years experience. And depending on how much they chose to engage, that was up to 18 hours of professional development. And what came out of this, as we mentioned, was what ended up being Addie's prelim and dissertation with the development of this observation tool. So lessons learned, lots. We did a lot of professional development, not a lot of getting research out of it, which is okay in the beginning, but then there needed to be a transition, and also okay in the beginning because it was COVID and we were all kind of doing the best that we could. So what we found were facilitators was a really small leadership team for Read Up so that we could make changes. So it's the size, but it's also who's on that team. And it needed to be the people who actually had the authority to make those decisions and those choices. And then the other most beneficial part was it directly benefited their classroom needs. So we had teachers who were then getting access to research-based resources that they could go back and draw on in their classrooms. But there were a lot of barriers. The virtual format, we were all just done with Zoom. It was also after contract hours, and for young teachers, they're still, or new teachers, they're still wondering like, but then kids are going to be here again tomorrow. So they're in their classrooms getting stuff together or not able to come. It also is inequitable for people who have childcare responsibilities, where after school they might not be available. The other huge thing was that stipend was not incentivizing. Appreciated, I'm sure everybody took it, but not incentivizing. That wasn't what kept people coming back and going. And then another barrier was just the isolation that special education teachers face, particularly novice special education teachers as well, who haven't built sort of that community. And so what we did then was, again, some of the students in Nicole's class helped us do a survey of administrators in Leon County. So because of the relationship we had and because of the trust that we had built by that point, one of the people from our team took the paper surveys to the meetings, because that's how you get a really good response. It's paper on the desks, and then they have to give it back to you. And so we were able to get a survey from every principal and assistant principal on what they perceived as their own needs for professional development and what they perceived their teachers' needs. We also wanted to know what format they preferred, and by and large, it was live in person, right? But that then presents challenges to think through, because if we want something live and in person, but not after contract hours, that means there's going to need to be classroom coverage. If there was a sub to be had, someone would have to pay for it. But we had this buy-in, we had this trust, we had the feedback survey showing that it was beneficial. So then the district was very willing to invest in that, in figuring out a way for us to be live and in person. So moving into the 2022-23 academic school year, this virtual PLC for novice special education teachers transitioned to an in-person event. And it wasn't just for the special education teacher, they also came with one of their building level administrators. So whether that was the assistant principal, dean of curriculum, something came with them. So we had 4 in-person events. So the district agreed to have coverage for those teachers so they could leave their classroom for a half day, as well as the admin. And then I think really important was they came to a nice place. We had it in the Champions Club at the stadium. I will never for my career forget the comments that first morning about, we have real dishes. And so that feeling of they felt special and like this was something beneficial for them. So at the same time, we're looking at like what research we did. Once that observation tool was developed, we're now able to validate it, which ended up being Maddie's dissertation. Additional partnership work we did was, I want to show the transition from us coming in and helping to then pulling back. Because while it's a long-term partnership, it doesn't mean once we start an activity, we never fade back. So part of the purpose is to build their capacity. And so by that school year, every teacher had been trained, every para had been trained in these 2 practices. And so the Zeleny, the EDS student, ended up just training any new people who joined so that everybody was still sort of on the same page with those practices. So we were just standing by for help as needed. Word was also starting to spread that like, hey, FSU will come and help do professional development or do things that you need. And so we then got a request from Montford Middle to do a UDL, a book study on universal design for learning for their general education teachers. So it was not for special education teachers, it was for, that school has a high population of students, neurodiverse students, a lot of students on the autism spectrum, a lot of students who are gifted, a lot of students with both, and they needed support in that area. And so we provided that through a wonderful book study. So I had already mentioned this, but where did it come down to as far as like the resources? The village paid for the space and food for 2 of the 4 events. And then the district had space and food for 2 of the events. So also we're sort of splitting these costs. And then there was a CDAR grant that allowed us to provide materials for the teachers because it had gone really well the past year. So one of the topics was grouping. And so they all got like grouping sticks. And then everyone also got a copy of the Highlighters Practices book that we were drawing on. And again, this was all led by Addie. Did it all. And this was again open to special ed teachers and an administrator. And so the research that we were able to get out of this was the validation of this Highlighters Practice observation tool. To give a bit of background or context, Highlighters Practices In this case, we're talking about for students with disabilities were developed by the Council for Exceptional Children, which is our professional organization. And they are bought into it and it's everywhere and it's not accessible or observable. So we have all these practices that we should be ensuring that our pre-service teachers have, but then there's not a tool to actually see if they have them. And so that was the goal, was to be able to develop a usable, feasible evaluation that can be used for planning professional development that's not evaluative. So here's some pictures from these events. The way that we had them organized in a half day was in the first 2 hours or so, breakfast, chatting, and then Addie would lead instruction on whatever that practice was. And then it always included some sort of application activity so that that teacher and their administrator could sit together and talk about, like, what would that look like here? What would that look like in our building, in our classroom? And then they split up and we had a time that was just the new teachers with no admins there, a very safe space. But then that also gave the district staff who came with us a chance to be with the administrators and no one else. So they also really enjoyed talking to each other as well, just as the teachers did. So moving into the 23-24 academic year, again, we're fading back some of this support, and the district then took a year to step back and see how they could incorporate high leverage practices more broadly in their professional development. And then finally in this year, we had 2 more studies. So after this technical assistance and training for Scale Up, we had another doctoral student who had been a part of those in-person professional developments do her dissertation there on teaching emerging literacy skills to students with extensive support needs, which, can I say like, oh, we never would have been able to do that without the partnership? I can't say that, but it's likely, the trust and the openness and the relationship we had already built. And then we also had a multiple case study that was Denise Dennis's dissertation looking at MTSS for behavior across the district, which also needed there needed to be some trust and some relationship to be willing to dive into that data. Right. And how are we going to sustain it?
Oh, no. One way is with funding. So as you heard, much of what we talked about, it wasn't cost neutral. It didn't cost in one way or another. A lot of in-kind costs, but other costs are necessary to do grand things. And so went after a grand grant, the Institutional Challenge Grant as a grant with the William T. Grant Foundation with support from the Spencer Foundation, the Doris Duke Charitable Fund, and now is it Gates? Maybe it's Gates. I'll remember who the third funder. There's another big funder at the table now. What we proposed was a grant where the whole point of an institutional challenge grant is to talk about how you are pushing your university forward to do more of this kind of work. That is the change, and that is the challenge you're trying to make happen. So we propose that we would build a model for how you do that in Tallahassee to reduce educational disparities. The William T. Grant Foundation specifically focuses on youth outcomes and disparities in youth outcomes. So that's why we picked educational disparities. From my map that I showed you before, I don't see how you make that kind of sea change if you don't engage for A&M. So we pulled them in to the grant with us and subcontract with them. And they have a lab school, the FAMU Developmental Research School. And so our thought was that we will leverage what we have learned and what we're understanding and growing with our partnership between FCRR and Leon Canyon Schools and try to do some of the similar things at Florida A&M and Florida A&M Developmental Research School. So it's about $1 million where we're working with these 2 school districts and these 2 universities to make change happen. And ultimately, it'll culminate in this playbook for how other public research universities like ours can work in this way. What you will find in the research practice partnership world is a lot of them happen at private institutions because money and also play, right? But the overwhelming majority of institutions of higher education are public institutions of higher education, and the majority of them exist in college towns like ours. So if we can figure out ways to build a model like this, you could really scale this approach to other places, to Tuscaloosa and to the Research Triangle and to Evanston, Illinois, and to Berkeley and to all these other places that are college towns where the colleges and institutions aren't necessarily, they very much so play in their locality, but that doesn't mean they're doing anything that addresses directly the disparities that the people who live there may face, right? So we're sort of putting that on the table. To do that, the first thing we did was step back and say, we gotta look at how we're doing. Let's assess the health of our existing partnership. There is a tool for how you can assess the health of and effectiveness of a research partnership according to these 5 domains, which include things like building trust, building capacity, informing educational outcomes, conducting research, and supporting the partner organization. So we use that tool to work with our local partners to evaluate how we were doing after 3 years. And overwhelmingly, what we found was that both our university partners and our school district partners felt like the trust was awesome and we were doing great at that. But then all of our university partners thought all the other indicators, we were knocking them out of the park. That we were supporting them and that we were informing their decision-making and that they felt like we were addressing disparity. And every single researcher said, no, we weren't. So every single researcher voted all of the indicators lower than our partners. Our partners had a much more favorable impression of the impact of research on what they were doing. We feel like it's not enough. We feel like they aren't using our research discoveries, or that the level of research that we're doing is not rigorous enough, or all these other things about how we do research is not good enough to make transformative change in the district. And so this is where we need to build capacity and infrastructure on our side. But we also need to do some building on the other side within the district in terms of how they think about and use research. For example, Jenny's example, professional development is not research. Answering a survey is not research. Saying you liked it is not research. So there is a part of this that is, now that they like us, how do we really dig in and get them to do the things that actually do involve changing decisions that matter for outcomes for kids?
Not longitude.
So, yeah. So in doing that, though, we updated our agreement. So we moved from a launching agreement into a full-on 5-year partnership agreement. We have a new theory of change that goes out to 2028, but the main outcome is still the same, that we want to improve achievement for students. One thing to keep in mind about these theories of change, you will see that we are asking for and driving towards improvement and change in research and in innovation and engagement. So we have goals and ideas around what we do as researchers, and we have goals and ideas about what we do as partnership too, and are driving resources towards all of those. The other thing we learned from working on doing this evaluation with our partners is that they wanted to expand. They continuously want to expand and focus on other areas that are beyond the scope of knowledge and expertise of the Florida Center for Reading Research, or Jenny or Nicole or Keisha. So, and if we created a table for them, they could probably find an area to focus on for every single faculty member in the College of Education. So we have to figure out ways to pull other people into this table, or for that, maybe make other tables. There's nothing that says that our partnership is the only one, should be the only one, has to be the only one, right? We don't have to lead everything. So how do you do that is a big part of this. But and in figuring this out, one area that was particularly important to them was moving towards post-secondary success or college and career readiness, depending on how you talk about it, because it's changed in the last 6 days, how they talk about it. So how do we do that? Well, one way we do that is we go find really awesome faculty at FSU who are already doing work in the area of post-secondary success and try to figure out how to onboard them into the partnership. And with that, I'll let you hear from Lara.
Truly, I was like, wait, is this what we're calling it now? We still have follow-up questions around that. So sometimes I actually am. So I'm gonna keep really quick, and I'm thinking about this in a very translational way. So in some ways I don't belong here. In some ways this makes a lot of sense. for me personally and hopefully for long term. So I'm a translator, I'm a connector. That's who I am as like a person and like professional identity. So I was very excited to be tasked and engage in this way and very excited. My story is maybe a little bit less around different barriers. So like kind of disciplinary barriers and even life course barriers. I'm a life course researcher. I do longitudinal work. I've always been a college and career person by identity. Even when I was going to be a medical doctor, when I was 16, I went to do adolescent medicine to look at gender inequalities and access to care. And so in some ways, I've been very constant, but like what labels are put on me have been very messy and something I feel very comfortable just swapping them around. Like today I'm college and career, then I'm here. I'm a higher ed person, but I do college access. Sure, I'll also talk about workforce development because that's inherently a part of it. So I just want to let you know, I care a lot about terminology. I'm friends with linguistic anthropologists. I know words matter, and I'm also a very practical person. I am a like self-starter. Ooh, time burned through. So I've had lots of small partnerships that I've been a part of. I don't have a center. I've tied into other people's centers as an evaluator, a partner, an affiliate. I'm an affiliate of the Village. I'm not a reading researcher, but I'm an affiliate of the Village. I think in this way, I've done housing study. I've done a housing RCT. I've done a lot of things that are on the margins as a researcher or a joiner, or I had a class funded similar to the partnerships class where I teach higher education outcomes assessment. I actually designed the revamp of it and then made it a sequence. And then I think about some of how you do meaningful research. So I'm speaking to you as students and early career folks in the room, especially, but not everyone. Is I've tag team different parts of my work and different energies. And I do also, I'm probably much more known about doing work on STEM inequalities, also longitudinally, also race and gender, especially engineering and computer science, but not exclusively. That is something I've cared about for very intrinsic, truly me genuine reasons. And also that's kind of a Hollywood thing in terms of funding. So if you think I've filmy type friends. So if you think about like your small little projects, like you love, it's like you're gonna care about, it's not gonna, you're gonna like find ways to fund those plates that are like real and you're just gonna have to work over time. And then you have other things that are just gonna hit because people like that and they already want that. So in some ways, I got derailed off of some of these kinds of things. So like they stayed as long as I had a sustaining mechanism. And then when I had other grants that came, I got pulled out of the classroom. I didn't have my classroom developmental workforce anymore to keep partnerships engaged. So I would help other people do other partnerships that were relevant for them as instructors and students. But my food and housing and security project stopped, even as I trained up over like 250 probably higher education professionals across 6 semesters on food and housing insecurity that have now gone all over the country and also here. And so when I talk to people now about data, assessments, and even food and housing insecurity specifically, but even just other ways of like tactily trying to use data to do decision-making here at FSU, it is a wild difference from where I was when I first started teaching those courses, and I'm not individually responsible for that at all, but I've been really enjoying getting to see that kind of transformation. I find it very exciting, and I hope that you have space for that too. So this is how I have engaged in the work over time and tried to make sense of it to me. And when I'm writing and making a case to my department chair, tenure letter writers, things like that, I just made full professor and wrote about partnerships and impact in that space. So background. So when I joined this project, one last thing on this slide before I move back. I've done work in Chicago and New York, and the ways that I did work in those spaces went through also kind of like broker space. Those are big cities, which I thought was much harder than doing that work here. So through in New York, I was working through the STE Association, which I had been like president of in my small county version of it in the New York suburbs. And my mom was one of the founding cohorts of it back in the 60s. So I sort of knew that space and who to contact. And I built a relationship with certain schools, and then I engaged in their programs. I hung out, I got donuts. Donuts are part in like coffee, other things like that. Sitting around having coffees are a big part of the story. Woo! I'm gonna do the rest really fast. And then in Chicago, similarly, I knew someone who helped me get into school, and then we did the thing. Here, it was a little slower going on the broad strokes of the FAMU DRS project for a number of reasons outside of this immediate space for time. But we did have a really amazing contact. And I have on purpose Janae Duclos-Francois and Janelle Masseline. Janelle Masseline is now a master's student here in the college, which is wonderful. It makes so much sense. She's been a great data and research partner and a part of this team. And so Janae and I help support her and her work. Janae had already been involved in FAMU DRS. We joined and started talking about things like efficiency and assessment, and here's how you use Qualtrics, and let's do some meaning making around, like, you want to do these workshops. What do people already know? What is it that you want to know? How can we maybe ask this in a more efficient way and then give you back the data? So we've done those kinds of activities leading into activities that they're already involved in. They asked us to go to a workshop. We went to the workshop. They wanted an evaluation survey. We made evaluation surveys. And so the story goes, and we've been trying to co-develop relationships together over time, and thinking about how to build on what they're doing and amplify, and trying to think about how to show up in that space as members of a team, and also to some degree also independently too. And so thinking about how to show up in the college and career space for Leon, there was not yet, like, we still have not had a meeting with the districts. They asked for college and career. This is not my first time around where there's a project that's about something else that's a more obvious need. I had a project in Cambodia where they didn't want to talk about post-secondary, but then some people in the government wanted to talk about post-secondary because it was way sexier and better feeling, similarly here, than talking about like literacy issues and that girls don't know how to read and they're not allowed to school. It doesn't make people feel good. But talking about how a handful of girls are able to go to school and what are they doing there, that makes them feel good. So similarly, there's interest in doing that work, which is not always there, but the what wasn't there. And so it started a little bit slower. There was some interest in understanding disciplinary patterns that came through contexts, including a former student of mine that's also involved in the district, that aligned with, again, coming up from education, other disciplinary things, and like gaps in my research where I kept looking at students who are already in these college prep courses, and you can only move the needle so far unless you go bigger. So I wanted to look at who's not showing up there at all, like who is just never getting into those courses. And how do we think about why? And so we started building this project around school discipline and pathways to academic courses. And Danielle and others are a part of that through this course. And then building that out, thinking about questions relevant to specific schools, engaging with them, talking about that. In this case, we didn't actually use coffee, but we did like stay present and think, propose focus group designs, proposed also developed a beautiful survey that I would still love to do and they liked, but they feel better about doing a focus group because the fewer permissions are involved. And so this is where we're beginning. We're asking and thinking about doing next steps, thinking about how to really scale this up sustainably, having done so much on the margins and trying to be really thoughtful about how to do this. There have been really thoughtful around how to like sustainably do this and engage more formally, and I will turn it over. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So these are two examples of how we are trying to build capacity for doing this kind of work at FCRR, but also at FSU. And so there are other things that are happening around sustainment that I am going to go through quickly because they can take several hours. And I feel like there's a richer discussion to be had here, but I put them here, and if you all want these slides, we can share them with you and we can certainly go through them with you. So back to that whole institutional change. When we submitted that grant, we submitted this map to make clear that if you want to change the way that public research institutions engage in research practice, partnership work, it is huge, right? these pieces of the map, without seeing all of it, is just Florida State. And at the time for Florida A&M, we were just focused on the College of Ed. And this is the complexity of their College of Ed. So there is the Vice President of Research's office and the Provost's office. There are, in the VPR's office, there's research development, but there are also research centers like ours. And then in our centers, there are different ways that we do things. But then on the Provost side,
There's also faculty development, there are deans, there are colleges, there are centers, there are programs and awards, there's community service things. There's a lot of stuff that happens at an institution that allows for this to happen, and it's really complicated to actually suggest you're gonna change any of that. So what I will say is there is a core strategy for what we think we're doing here. And that core strategy has some assumptions to it, which you see inherently in this work, that universities and communities are always in constant change. So coming up with something sustainable when change is inherent is really difficult, but it means you're gonna have to be both proactive and reactive. You can't be one or the other, you kind of have to be both. The second is that in college towns and specifically that the success of the university and community are tied. One goes with the other. We are the largest employer, we are the largest economic engine. The way we go is the way they go. And you have to accept it. And then organize in that way if you're going to move change for the community. And then thirdly, that if you're gonna, it is a constant churn of change and action all the time. These partnerships become stability because those people stay, right? If a partnership inherently is about a long-term collaboration, those people stay, right? Every school that we all work at, every public agency we all work with in this local community, how many of you know people there who've been there more than 5 years, 10 years, or their mom used to work there and now they work there, right? So certainly FSU is that as well, right? And FAMU is that as well. These partnerships become the sustaining power of this type of work if you can make them work well, or at least that's what we're putting on the table. We can be stability in this dynamic environment. So to do that means you've got to leverage a lot of different things, and I'm going to give you a couple examples of how we do that. One tactic is training students. So you heard in each one of these projects, we had doctoral students and or master's students, in some cases undergraduate students, engaged in the work that they are doing through coursework, through their graduate research assistantships. Some are doing DISs and or just volunteering for research hours in the work that we're doing. So they are an inherent part of learning how to make this happen and sustaining how it happens. And one thing you should notice is it's not just me, it's not just my funding, it's funding across lots of different faculty who are making this happen. We have courses. We have 2 courses where we have students do things that would be supportive of this kind of work, but in particular, this one is research in communities and schools. In this particular course, students are placed in an active research practice partnership on day 1, wherever it is in January when the course is offered. And they spend hours throughout the entire semester working in that partnership on the things the partners say they want to do at that given time. For example, in one partnership last year, we had them work with Leon County Schools where they were particularly focused on implementing a new curriculum, youth-led curriculum, which is an early learning curriculum that is supplemental. It happens in K-2 classrooms. The district had bought it, district's gonna do it. They had training come in. They have 2 coaches in the district who were doing observations in every single elementary school classroom across the district, and they tried to do 2 observations. So you can imagine what that would take. But they had done it, and they wanted us to help them figure out what they saw, because they had been in every single elementary, every single kindergarten, 1st grade classroom in the district. And so we, students at that time in that class went through their observation protocols, coded those things to try to come up with some understanding of patterns of behavior and what they thought they were seeing. This was a very real local problem. This is it's funny because Jenny texted me because he was listening to a school board meeting where they talked about the Hegarty study. And that the Hegarty study showed up on the Facebook post for the school board meeting. And there are parents who are upset that the district has put money into this thing that may or may not be effective. But YouthFly is effective, why won't they do that? And it was going back and forth, back and forth. And this was also at the same time when the budget got cut from their CARES and ESSER's dollars, which meant that they were on that instructional coaches were on chopping block and that they might be getting rid of them across the district. So from our observations from the work that the students did in that class, they created this infographic that the district was able to use to talk about the impact of the work that the coaches were doing with implementing this evidence-based instruction in classrooms. How many students are impacted? how many classes are impacted, how many hours were spent doing it, what it meant for student outcomes. And well, not only as a result, I can't say that we are entirely causal, but we are part of the reason why they decided to keep instructional coaches in elementary schools in the district. They could not fund them in middle and secondary, but they use this as part of their reasoning for saying you can't get rid of instructional coaches in elementary school, for example. So the work the students do has a real impact. We're also trying to be better just about communicating this work. Like everything else that we all do, you do it. You don't really have time to talk about it, let alone time to write about it. You just keep doing it, right? So we try to go to school board meetings and make sure we present there. We have also created templates for how to create research snapshots and research briefs, which are not journal articles, right? Because these partners are not going to read journal articles, but they can take hold of 1-pager or 3-pager that explains the findings and what those findings mean for what decisions they make. So we created some templates for that. Created a way to give them DOI so they go on your CV, they count for you. We also are trying to be better about putting stuff out there in the world on, like, this stream went through Twitter or Instagram or something like that. But keep in mind that communicating about research and science still remains very difficult. It's difficult for us. When we put out that Heggerty snapshot, which was written for our district partners, academic Twitter didn't like it, so they wanted to know what the freaking effect size was, and we were like, this is not for you. You're not the audience. But explaining to our colleagues that is hard because they have an expectation of what they will receive from FCRR, and what you will receive is an effect size. Like, so they have an expectation for what research looks like from us, and what we think and what we have communicated that rigorous research is. And when we don't do things that are along their expectation, they don't like it, right? Sometimes it's because they really are looking for an effect size. Sometimes it's because they're looking to prove whatever they want to have to prove. Because some people don't like Heggerty a lot, and they've been screaming about it a lot on social media. So FCRR putting out something that says Heggerty sucks, ooh, I can use that, right? So you get used in these social spaces as well. So how is it that you communicate with a non-academic audience? Well, it's a problem. It's a challenge that we're trying to figure out. Another thing we're doing is trying to lift up faculty expertise in this space. I think that a lot of times when we talk about research practice partnership work, there's always a conversation about tenure, and in that conversation about tenure, it's always about whether or not this work matters and it counts to be engaging in communities. So there is an issue with the prestige of this kind of work. So we created an award at FSU for this kind of work through this grant. It's gone through one cycle. It will go through a cycle again this year, so it'll come out again. So mark your calendars, it'll be due around December 15th again. Last year we awarded 3. And what you will notice is that they are faculty in English, geography, and common disorders, so not all education. So again, institutional change, not just us, everybody has a way to be able to engage in this. Their partners are diverse. This is a government agency in Canada for this particular tribe of Indigenous people, where he's working with them to build their capacity to be able to monitor their lands. So their lands can't just be taken up by the government, but they need to know how to use the tools to make that happen. So that's his partner, for example. But she's got a partner here that's Head Start. She's got a partner, in her particular work, she's working with the Descendants Project. They are looking at the plantation highway through Louisiana, and how it is we are educating people about the history of plantations. And she is engaging descendants of slaves from that area and building resources and studying those resources to eventually come up with a rubric to rate plantations on how it is that they talk about their history, for example. If people get awards like this that are at the level of developing scholar, that are at the level of these other kinds of awards that we have here, it raises the prestige of this kind of work. And then finally, we're trying to develop, sorry about that. We are, and our partners at Florida A&M, they're doing the same thing. So they started provost professorships. So they started 2 professorships who report directly to the provost, specifically focused on building up collaborative research partnerships across the institution. And so these 2, Dr. Randolph and Dr. Ellis, are working with us on this project to get this going at Florida A&M. And then I can't see the left. Oh, I made a change, but you can't see it. So I'm just gonna say the last thing that we're doing is developing training for faculty. It'll be specifically targeted towards mid-career faculty, mid-career and senior faculty. Again, this goes with the raising the prestige, raising the valor of this type of work. But that means we have to equip people who might be ready, but are still sort of like, I've done all the self-guided stuff, I've done all the stuff online that I can do, but I need a grant, right? Or I need to cross the threshold. I need a partnership agreement. I need a theory of change. So we are developing some training here that we're gonna pilot this year here, and then it'll be available to other institutions to use for free, to provide facilitated job embedded training for those faculty to then lead, to create and to lead and to sustain partnerships like this in their institutions as well. There you go. I think I've given us at least 20 minutes, I think 15, 20 minutes to talk. So I will stop there. Thank you. Yeah, see, it's here, but it's not there. Well, that's the training, but again, I just said that, but I'll leave you with a cool graphic. This is our most recent graphic. We just finished it today. So, the schools, Leon County schools, the schools who have been working with us and facilitated communities of practice, there are changes in their school grades. And so some of the schools that have been working with us have seen historic changes in their school grades. Not that we caused it, we were just at the table, right? Questions for any of us?
Do you have anything online, Matt, in the chat or anything for folks?
I have one.
Mhm.
Yeah, so you mentioned that this is from Kinetic. You mentioned that there's a difference of opinion between partners and researchers on what research is, or how well you were meeting the rigor of research. What are some of the key challenges getting in the way of implementing the level of research that you're hoping to complete?
You guys have ideas? I have ideas, but why don't you, I've talked a lot.
I think my challenge has been exactly what Nicole said, of doing the work. And being proactive, but not taking the time to, like, you did it, you collected the data, and now you need to analyze and write it up. So for me, I'm sitting on like data mountain, and the barrier is the needs haven't stopped, right? So when I think about allocating my effort and my time, there's not like some extra space where that goes. So I think related to the development awards and the fellowship that Lara and I have, that's what's made some of the publishing and dissemination possible, is having funding to allocate my time from teaching to research.
I would say the same thing. I think also one, maybe as a way to think about some of the ways that your time could be spent. There's a lot of relationship building here. That's true for RCTs also that are more traditional, like effect size kind of oriented. But you have to build these relationships and sustain them to go. And so sometimes for publishing, there are challenges if you've like only got one site. Sometimes people are really resistant to do this with only one site, or sometimes the needs of schools are different, or whatever your site may be. I've actually been starting this, trying to think about how, even if I've got my feet in like our collective feet in multiple areas, we're trying to be like specific to the needs and like structures that are in that space. But also think about how there might be a possibility for comparative case study, or for at least being able to attend to different kinds of contexts. So there might be more of an on-ramp for either other people who are part of the research project to be able to attend to different pieces of that, or to be able to do some like publishing once it's all settled. So there are some things that are around what is the nature of the research that you're doing, and how much time do you have to build those relationships, and then what's rewarded in publishing, and then 1000% what Jenny said, of as you keep collecting, maybe any original data collection project, but certainly something like this, that's relationship management and data collection. You're gonna keep accumulating data and then, your expectations of like where it needs to be to publish on it are sometimes even higher than reviewers
Yeah.
are. So you have to like just step back and let go.
I would add, and I should have said this slide wouldn't come up, but these guys are what are called mid-career fellows in the grant. We had to identify faculty to be fellows in the grant as a part of building capacity for doing this. And so we truly appreciate what they do for this project to help us learn and grow and push change at the university. And then Novell Tanny at Florida A&M is our third faculty fellow who was involved in it as well. To answer, I will add, they are right about all those things. The only other things I would add on the research side of it is, I think more recently, there's more interest and therefore more places to publish this kind of work and call it RPP work and let it be valued as that. You will see more special issues, you will see more journal articles in places where that work is kind of accepted. So that's a good thing, but previously it wasn't, so that makes it difficult. Then I would say the other thing that they bring up on our side is there's a reason why it's mid-career. So all of the stuff they're talking about, but they have tenure, right? All the stuff that we're talking about, but I'm a full professor. Like I have space to do things that people who are pre-tenure or early in their career are very much so wanting to do, but you could jeopardize your track towards getting tenure. And we can have a whole philosophical discussion here about whether or not that's right or wrong, and therefore that's why I put it here. But but it is the reality of where we live right now. And if we want you all to be here and be tenured, then we can't sacrifice you to this, right? So it really does, there is a challenge about where you are in your professionally and being able to have the capacity to do it. On the partner side, the challenge with research is often it really is they don't know what research is. They don't know how to ask research questions that can actually be answered with research. There are many questions out there that are not researchable, that can't be answered, or even if you could answer them, it wouldn't actually make stuff better for them, right? So they don't always understand what research is, let alone what it can and cannot do, and be accepting of that, be okay with that. So that's a real challenge. The other challenge is, as a result, there are often not that many people in schools and community organizations who are researchers. They don't necessarily have directors of research or a research staff or research team, even in districts where, you know, you have all of this accountability data coming in. Those people who are managing those data may not be researchers. They're people who manage data, right? They report for accountability purposes, but they too are not necessarily asking and answering questions. There's a drive to train that group of people to be more researcher-y in that way. But then you have the same sustainability and capacity building issues, because if you train them up, they're gonna get paid to go somewhere else. They're not staying there, right? If you can get on their schedule, because those are super busy people. The accountability reporting in any district is insane, so they don't have time to play around with you, right? So what are their incentives? How are we paying them to make sure that they engage? So at minimum, those are very real issues for getting the practice side to see and value and understand research.
I think the other, and this is a difficulty in education research broadly, would be that always the desire to come back to child outcomes. And which, that is why we're all here, child outcomes, but I feel like now we're, after several years, at the point when we have conversations that they understand like cascading logic. They understand that saying I did something with a teacher doesn't mean that child necessarily is going to read better. So thinking about all the professional development, the PLCs, this was very much a conversation too with the novice teacher support, because they're like, but how will we see that their students learn better? We're like, oh, we're not there. We want them to stay till their fourth year. Like that's our goal, because we do know that high turnover and novice teachers do not have generally as much of an impact on student outcomes. So having to make the case that we need to support them so they stay and then their kids will have good outcomes it's just as hard as in your grant narratives.
Yep. Can I say one more thing? Especially because there are a lot of students in the room and we celebrate the successes, but this is messy. And we've talked about this a lot in the training. My partnership work is absolutely what was the hardest to publish. And I just became full professor, but not on the partnership work. Like I wrote about it. People like it. People like it when I went into my faculty again. Yeah. When I was set up to fail in one of my, not intentionally, but on my first like job talks when I was moved from being a grad student or postdoc to a faculty member, they got so excited, A, that I was a mixed methods researcher, B, that I was interested in these kinds of projects. But then they asked me these kinds of questions, and then like what they wanted me to talk about was too big. At one place asked me to talk about a specific thing. And so like I spent a lot of time doing what a prior IES director talked about in a ARA group that I was in as like coffee meeting. Like you go and you sit and you talk about things. And I sat in engineering for like a year and a half before anything happened. Just like sitting in rooms, pitching things, like trying to do a CRC proposal, just sort of not getting anywhere, things going a little like dry, similar energies in Cambodia. So I had all these original data projects that were mounting on each other and taking a lot of my time. And then my colleagues that are doing quantitative work and were like third author on something, were just like churning out all these third and fourth author publications where they were just like flying. And so it was like a real struggle for me to get through that mid-career, my mid-associate, my mid-assistants, like the third year I went through, but I was definitely struggling to get over that hump and then had to make different decisions. And then I flew through the second part of that, but not on the basis of this, but I got to keep doing this work because of these kinds of opportunities and because of just like that kind of trade-off space making. So that was the reason why I planted the Hollywood example, like trying to have something that's steady that you know is going to keep going and providing opportunities to your students or whoever you're working with, and trying to help and give support back to your practitioner communities of interest, while you eventually get to have enough cohorts that you feel like you can write about it to the research communities that are going to make an impact for your career. In the meantime, you keep making impact in the spaces you want to.
Yeah, I would just add one more thing to that and then go to the next question. But I do think it's something to keep in mind. We yell a lot about how this work isn't valued in tenure, and that's why. That's why it's a problem. I'm gonna set that aside and also impress upon you that the other reason why maybe this is some work that should be at least led by and opportunities created by more senior faculty is because you have a different level of skill and competency to do this, right? So when you sit with someone in the district and they say, and you think you're gonna research this, but then they say this, and you're like, oh, I know there's a design like this, because you know more designs. You know more about the breadth and depth of your field and other fields and how they fit together. You have a mind map that is very different further on in your career than you do now, that allows for the kind of flexibility and intuitiveness that happens in this kind of work that you don't have, you simply haven't had the time to have that early in your career. So it's not, I think we make a mistake when we pit them against each other and say that it's like a value judgment or something, and that people just don't value this kind of work. That's why they don't want to give you tenure on it. I'm not saying that there are not issues with that, but I am saying there is actual skill and competency that you learn early in your career that you can then leverage to move fast at associate because you learn how to do it. You have to allow yourself the opportunity to have that learning. And if you're doing all of this, if you're waiting in engineering to have coffee with people who may or may not show up for 18 months, you're not learning those skills, right? So there is a balance there for a reason. Matt, did you have another question maybe there?
That's the only one in the chat, so
Okay,
we have about time for maybe one more question in person.
sure.
Yeah.
I put those up there as to get conversation going, but does anyone have any other questions themselves? Yes.
Question. So how would you advise your faculty who want to kind of start small in engaging in partnerships like this? What are some really concrete first steps that someone might want to do to not get overwhelmed and not, give space to learn the skills needed to have successful partnerships? But how to get started? I think maybe some people struggle with that just a little bit.
Awesome. I am going to show you this really great resource. I'll end us with that. So in fact, if you go
This question wasn't planted by
to
the way.
FCR's website, under the village where this work lives, you will see a link to something called the National Network for Research, for Education Research Practice Partnerships, NERP. So that's one way to get there. But, and because I have to make you go to FCR's website. But if you just Google NERP, it'll come up. And if you Google NERP, this is, and on 100% transparency, and honestly, this is how I started. It wasn't, I was an assistant professor. So, and NERP didn't exist yet, but they were almost going to exist. There were funding from different agencies that were starting to fund this kind of work. And in doing that funding, they created a clearinghouse. The clearinghouse used to live on the William T. Grant Foundation's page, and NERP has since taken it over. In this clearinghouse are a ton of documents around the basics of RPPs, how you launch one, how you think about all the stuff we talked about, how you make a theory of action, what do you do to partner up, what are the documents you need, what kind of funding is there? So there's a ton of information available here in this clearinghouse. In addition to that, you will see that coming up in October, they have an RPP 101 workshop session. This, by the way, is why we're not making one. There is one that already exists. This is to get started. It is a 5-part virtual series on the basics, starts on October 2nd. Each of these sessions are 1 hour, 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern time. Zoom in, and they will go through the basics of pretty much walking you through the clearinghouse and what's in there. So that's a good place to get started. The other thing that you will find, we talk about here as well with NERP. Now, let me see if I can find it. There is a tool that would be useful, but I'm trying to think through quickly how to get you to the tool. I'm just gonna. I know it's on this website, but I can't find it right now. But there is a tool that NERP has also created about it's how to get started and sort of milestones and things you should think about as you get going with an RPP. Where is the link to the tool? Sure, I'm missing it. It's right there at the top. So there is a tools document here where they talk about things like in your first year, strongly consider doing these things, right? But then maybe don't worry so much about these things. These things like exploring governance structures is nice to do, but you don't really need to worry about that in the first year. And then these are things really to watch out for. Watch out for turnover, watch out for data access issues, because as you were talking about, the data really matters to doing the actual research. And sort of landmarks here, you know, things you can't recover from. So don't go in there if you're not ready for it, right? Like it, for example, no clear vision for what the RPP is. There's a dance here because you want it to be shared and you want to develop it together. But just remember, these people don't have time for you. They have a full-time job doing whatever it is they're doing for the people that they serve. You want to play with them. So if you're going over there and you're just gonna say, yeah, so what you got going on, what are you interested in? They don't have time for that. Like, you need to do your homework and know before you walk in the door, the things that are really mattering for them, the things that are top of mind for them, and how it is you think whatever you're bringing to the table might address things that are on the tip of their tongue. But if you're there to try to pull it out of them, they really do not have time for you. So don't go in there without a vision for what you think you might be able to do, and then be ready for them to tear it apart. But you have to start with something. So I would start there. So I would start with this milestones tool. I would start with the clearinghouse, and if you've got time for it, I would do the RPP 101 this fall.
I'm gonna add in because kind of as you're doing that, especially if you're a student here or new faculty going into a new place, and you do, especially if you do apply school-based research, is get to know that place. I watch every school board meeting online. It's riveting. No, but we wanna know what's happening and who's talking about what, and that's why I'm texting Nicole. Show up if you have children, show up to events, go to community events, be a person in the community so that they know it's a long-term commitment and embrace that multiple roles and the messiness that comes with like, I am a parent, but I'm also a researcher, but I also might be your professor. And also, would you like to come to do a doctoral program? So like, you have to be comfortable with that messiness.
Yeah.
We've run out of time, but could you join me in thanking our panelists? Don't go anywhere, just yet though, if you are in Professor Cabell's EDG 6008 or 6009 course, you need to sign this, but he needs to know that. So, other than that, thanks for coming today, we'll see you next time.
Yeah, our no rate Pete, Dr. Adam Conway will be joining us, so please keep that on your radar. We'll be sending out flyers and more information. Please leave with something. Peace. Okay, thank you all for coming. We appreciate your time.
It's like sharing, right? Like trying to make it about sharing. I know that I can't find.
Sorry.